Welcome, everyone. We will shortly be beginning. We are just awaiting the arrival of the Prime Minister of Fiji, so thank you for your patience. Welcome, Mr. Prime Minister.
Good to see you again.
Thank you for coming back.
Good to see you again.
We are welcoming you on stage. Yes.
Voilà. How are you?
Good morning. Welcome, Your Excellency, distinguished speakers and guests. On behalf of WWF, the Government of Fiji, the Asian Development Bank, it is my pleasure to welcome everyone with us in Glasgow and those who are joining us virtually around the world to our event today. My name is Polly Merriman, and I work with WWF's Global Oceans Practice, where we are working to secure productive and resilient ocean ecosystems for the benefit of people and nature. I'm delighted to have the honor of moderating this event, Climate Frontliners, Coastal Communities in the Implementation of the Paris Agreement and Small Island Developing States, a topic which could not be more timely nor more urgent. Often referred to as frontliners of climate change, the Pacific in recent years has suffered serious harm from the impacts of the interlinked climate and biodiversity crises. The global pandemic has been making waves across the Pacific region, adding further burden to already vulnerable communities and nature. For thousands of years, the first people of Oceania have advanced time-tested nature-based solutions and traditional knowledge that are essential to build resilience and adapt to these challenges. This event today is designed to showcase and promote the important efforts underway across the Pacific, together in partnership, to advance solutions to address the challenge of climate change impacts with local communities. Our distinguished speakers today are acutely aware of these challenges and are actively engaged in addressing them. So we're delighted to have them join us today and the opportunity to hear their unique perspectives. And without further ado, I will just briefly introduce them. The Prime Minister of Fiji, the Honorable Frank Bainimarama, a true ocean champion, and who will kindly kick off our discussion today with his keynote address. Following the Prime Minister, we're looking forward to introducing Secretary George Eustis, Member of Parliament and Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs for the UK, who will highlight the UK priorities with respect to advancing ocean climate solutions and the UK ambitions for the Blue Planet Fund. We're also delighted to be joined by Mrs. Tina Stigi, Climate Envoy for the Republic of the Marshall Islands, who will share her perspectives on the critical issue of human rights and the ocean climate nexus. We're also pleased to be joined by Noelle OBrien, Incoming Director of Climate Change at the Asian Development Bank, who will share her thoughts on the role of development partners and financial institutions to support Pacific coastal communities in adapting to climate change. We're also delighted to have our very own Dr. Mark Drew, WWF Pacific Director. He is going to join us and share his thoughts on WWF's effort to facilitate Pacific communities in accelerating climate action. And we will have some virtual guests, including Ms. Atina Schultz, Pacific Youth Delegate, who will share her thoughts and that of the youth of the Pacific who are fighting against climate change at every level. And finally, will we hear from Anton Gigov from Matanataki, who will join us to share and highlight the important role of the private sector in empowering and enabling financial solutions with support of communities. But before we kick off our discussion, I'm pleased to share a short video which will highlight the urgency of the climate change challenge for atoll countries like Kiribati, the Maldives, the Marshall Islands, and Tuvalu.
Elkun lang alamen widagim menogorot mer. Jua matolak katanar pa. Pagayo matolak jit kurege ejago. Alam meram widagego yar. Matai chiriget ko bailo yani uyan. Kuyo ejago. Elkun laban yutokono emrialang lawan moyo alaben yar jotok yatal ren. Tông cho tôi có là ngăn nhát em kèn cái quan này này tắc im kita makan này chắc.
This is what happened to our islands because of the soil erosion. You can see that this tree, it's gone. It's like only now you can see the roots, and now actually just 2 years before it was sand like here. And sometimes when the waves come in now, it's come like this. And when it is big waves, all houses affected. And the beach is gone. And there are so many trees on this beach, and this all gone. And like we have like 5-7 years before, we have 300 meters of beach, and we used to play football. It is all gone.
Compared from 20 years ago, compared with the king tides right now, we see that it's more often right now, and not only that, compared the king tides in previous years when I was young, it's quite hard to see that kind of king tides before. But now, as we can see that the king tides comes now is much more stronger, and not only that, much more higher. This is my home, and This is our veranda here, our tour from this side. And since the king tide just came the beginning of this year, we can see that it's very strong there. And it just hit our house here, damaged all this part. All the stones and all the beaches, they just enter the sands, and all the rubbish, they just enter our house, and we couldn't sleep.
Luas soliva tau sanga neola inungai te whenua tēnei ko whanāwhutsi. Sanga ko nei neola e iau, inungai te matu tēnei ko whanāwhutsi. Luas soliva tau sanga neola e iau i te matu tēnei ko whanāwhutsi. E uke kia ko mea ne lawea ne au, te mawhuli inga inungai te matu tēnei. Tāsi mai ei, ko te tai whanake, te rā ko te tai lasi. Te pakotianga o ia ilunga i te matu tēnei ko whanāwhutsi, e awe ne ia alaukele, to e se ne ia alaukele, e uke mai ilunga i te matu tēnei. Kia ko whakamoemoenga pe lamsa talawo ilunga i te matu tēnei ko whanāwhutsi. Ia kai atu kunga i te climate change ke tama whai o ngā sue mai o whai se atia kenga ki lunga i te matu tēnei o whanāwhutsi ke tū mau a te laukele ilunga nei, ko te mea ke o lai e fia mātou, i lunga i te whenua tēnei ko whanāwhutsi.
Thank you. What a powerful reminder of the very real threat of climate change that is posing an existential threat to many nations at this moment. It is with that reality in focus that it's an honor now for me to introduce a real ocean champion who's long been pushing for greater climate, ocean action and ambition, the Prime Minister of Fiji, to offer his keynote comments. The floor is yours, Prime Minister.
Thank you, Bulavinaka, and very good morning to everyone. Bulavinaka. Winston, Kenny, and Yasa, Josie, Gita, Anna, and Mona, Paula, Zina, Kini, and Chino, and Sarai, Harold, and Ula. 5 short of the number of grandchildren I have back home. But those aren't any of my cousins or my children or my grandchildren. They are the names of the 13 cyclones that have struck Fiji since we ratified the Paris Agreement. Despite our islands being small targets in a vast Pacific, our homes have endured storms of a ferocity and scale unknown by living memory. And I could share hundreds of stories of the suffering that has come with them. In the midst of raging cyclones, families have watched as their homes are ripped off their pilings. Others have huddled together in community halls as the wall collapses and floodwaters arise. Farmers have seen years of hard work, as well as their income and their dignity as breadwinners, washed away in hours. And in the aftermath, there are the children in Fiji who have stood in the records of what were once their classrooms. Many of them still shudder when they hear the rumble of heavy rains. And then there is the slower and more insidious terror of seeing a community lose ground, inch by inch, to the encroaching waters, eroding any hope that your children will inherit your home, your fishing grounds, your cultural landmarks, and the land where your ancestors are buried. And when farmers look the future of their fields, erratic weather has robbed them of certainty. It's not only floods, but longer droughts that can kill crops while encroaching seawater ruins their soil. Fijians are not weathering these storms and these horrors as helpless victims. For every story of sorrow there are 10 more I could tell of strength and courage. Our rallying cry that we are stronger together than any cyclone has spurred us in our campaign to build back better. We are adapting and we are improving our systems of disaster warning and readiness. Ladies and gentlemen, I have to say I'm tired of applauding my people's resilience. Resilience should not be about testing the limits of a nation's grit. It should not be a test of people's ability to find happiness amid challenging and dangerous circumstances, as Fijians are often known to do. In the context of frontline of climate risks, resilience is about access to resources. It is seawalls, it is stronger homes and schools, it is parametric insurance, it is the safe and equitable relocation of communities, it is about cyclone-proofing infrastructure. Here at COP26, it is about delivering on the $100 billion promise and making sure that finance is affordable and used effectively. In small island development states, we have no choice but to put all our resources work now to save lives and set an example the world can follow. I say we are setting an example because while we stand on the front line of climate change, we are also on the cutting edge of climate innovation and the systematic change required to rise to the challenge we face. Resilience building cannot be achieved through pilot projects alone. It must become a full-time sector of the Fijian economy if we are to stand any chance to protect and raise living standards in a warmer world. It must become the full-time occupation, not of hundreds of Fijians, but of hundreds of thousands. And we are laying the legal foundation upon which a resilient, sustainable, and net zero Fiji can be built. Can I have a copy of this Climate Change Act? This, Your Excellencies and ladies and gentlemen, this is our North Star, a newly passed Climate Change Act that recognizes that climate change is a threat to the rights and freedoms of all Fijians. It sets net zero emissions target for 2050 and our target to sustainably manage 100% of our ocean with 30% as MPAs, marine protected areas. A mission we are working towards with the UK government. It establishes a legal framework that recognizes carbon sequestration, property rights, and incentivizes the protection of our carbon stocks through emissions reduction projects. It holds our private sector accountable for their carbon footprint through transport reporting. It charges relevant agencies to conduct climate risk assessments and ensures that approval for new buildings and infrastructure projects is only granted if the proposal is Paris compliant and climate risks sensitized. It recognizes that we must not only adapt our physical infrastructure but also our legal architecture if we are to withstand and manage climate shocks. It is our hope that our foresight today empowers tens of thousands of Fijian children who watch their country devastated by cyclones to dedicate themselves to building a more resilient nation as they progress through life, so that their children can be spared from much worse. That, ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, is the future we want. That is the future we are working for. I urge all of you here to work with us. We eagerly seek partnerships to create scalable solutions that start in Fiji and grow to help build a more resilient world. As we say in Fiji, Vinakabagaleu. And it says on the wall, It's time to deliver on high climate ambition. No excuses. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister, for those inspiring words. It is indeed time, and we are very much looking forward to working with you, and we thank you for your leadership in Fiji, and we thank you for your leadership on ocean action within the UNFCCC, making a pathway also, we hope, at this COP, so that it also can indeed be very blue. So it is now my pleasure to turn to George Eustis, Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, and to ask him to share an update on the UK's £500 million Blue Planet Fund, which aims to support developing countries to protect the marine environment and reduce poverty. Secretary, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, and it's a real pleasure to be here today, but also to follow that really powerful keynote speech from the Prime Minister of Fiji. I think we all recognise that Pacific Island nations, particularly the small island developing states, understand perhaps more than anybody else the critical links between the health of our oceans, the health of our planet, and holds many of the key things that we'll need to adapt to climate change, to mitigate it. And of course, as the Prime Minister pointed out very powerfully, by listing the names of all of those storms that have hit Fiji in recent times, the small island developing states in the Pacific are very much on the front line of dealing with climate change, with many of them obviously lying at risk of floods. They see firsthand the impacts of climate change, and that's why the UK has been delighted to work with Fiji on that North Star project, and I'm going to say a bit more about other similar projects that we have as well. But the ocean absorbs around 90% of excess heat in the planet, so it has a crucial role in moderating the impacts of climate change. And it is also, of course, home to around 80% of biodiversity. And that's why in the UK we really welcome the mood that we're getting here at this COP26. Many countries coming forward with new announcements and new commitments. Many of those small island developing states in the Pacific very much coming forward with their own announcements that will help us keep 1.5 degrees alive. And I think the message that is coming from some of those Pacific nations is really powerful and could also help move other countries as well. Now, I'm very much keen that the Pacific Island states have got a vital role to play in the work that we're doing in the UK to protect 30% of the world's oceans by 2030. I know that many Pacific states have already signed up to the Global Ocean Alliance and that particular pledge. I hope that more will join, and we want to work with you to protect these resources. In the Pitcairn Islands, for instance, we've already achieved so much on things like marine protected areas, with a new management plan, a whale watching code, and some work on IUU fishing as well. And the government is also working closely with Pacific SIDS to deliver on our shared priorities. For example, as was highlighted by the Prime Minister, there is a new UK Fiji-led Access to Finance task force, which released a call to action on SIDS access to finance on the 7th of October this year. And in the UK, we've also committed £11.6 billion over the next 5 years towards climate finance. And we've been pressing hard to encourage other big emitters to step up to their commitments, including through our G7 chairmanship as well as the UK COP presidency. So I'm very pleased that my department in the UK government is providing £400,000 of technical assistance to support Fiji's innovative blue bond work, and I hope that this is going to become a model that other Pacific states will want to follow to help mobilize resources and empower communities. And of course, this week the UK Prime Minister launched the Small Island Developing States Capacity and Resilience Programme, the UK's first ever global programme dedicated to SIDS. It's a £40 million capacity building fund to help improve access to climate and concessional finance. And the Prime Minister's also announced a $10 million UK contribution to the Infrastructure for Resilient Island States initiative. So there's a great deal to be done. And I know you mentioned the Blue Planet Fund. This was a fund that we announced earlier this summer at the G7 in June. It's a £500 million fund running over the next 5 years. There are 4 key areas that it will support. One, very relevant obviously this week, is around climate change. It's also going to support biodiversity projects in our oceans. It's going to support tackling illegal and unregulated fishing. And finally, assist in dealing with pollution as well. Now, we've already announced a first £5 million commitment out of that fund to support the Global Fund for Coral Reefs, which is a multilateral international project. But we're also doing quite a lot of work now to identify other SIDS programs that can benefit from that £500 million fund that we've set out. We very much look forward to working with all of you on that. Earlier today, my colleague, Lord Goldsmith, was on a different panel and announced some additional work that we're doing on the Ocean Resilience Action Plan, which is a new global initiative to focus on ocean resilience. And this is projects out of this very much what we want to support with that Blue Planet Fund. So I'm delighted to be here today. A very passionate, moving speech from the Prime Minister of Fiji. The UK's been working with Fiji, as he pointed out, through that North Star project and others. And we very much look forward to doing more of that work in the future.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. Fantastic to hear about the partnership that is already underway, as well as the financial commitment to ensure that these actions that are so needed can be supported, leveraged, and scaled for the future. So thank you very much. It's now my pleasure to move to discuss and introduce Tina Stege, the climate envoy of the Marshall Islands. Tina, we saw from the video about the impacts of climate change are growing and, of course, posing an existential threat to atoll nations. We would love to hear your thoughts on what you would like to see as from the outcomes of COP26. What are the actions and responses that you're looking for coming out of Glasgow? Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you. And first of all, much respect to the Prime Minister for leading us off and being such a leader in our region. Also, Minister, Excellencies, friends, ladies and gentlemen, it's really a pleasure to be with you today. And I think you saw from that opening video of atoll island nations, including my own, the Republic of the Marshall Islands. We're really on the very front of the front lines with no higher ground to retreat to. And so we understand, as do all of our brothers and sisters in the Pacific and in islands around the world, the stakes of this fight. I think when I was invited to speak as well to, in particular, the human rights aspects of what we're facing. And I think more and more people are recognizing that climate change is a human rights issue, but it's not enough to see that these are connected. It's really about actions, and I go back to that wall. It's time to deliver on ambition, and then action, and that's why there's no excuses. So the Marshall Islands is really doing its part to lead in this space. I like to say small but mighty. Regardless of your size, if you take the decision to lead, you can make a difference. And that's really what we are doing. In Geneva, we have led efforts to create a special rapporteur on the protection and promotion of human rights in the context of climate change. And that special rapporteur will not only look at the climate impact on human rights, but most importantly, look at climate action or lack thereof. And I think we all know that as we're here at Glasgow, that there's a real lack of action. There are huge gaps that need to be addressed. So we have also in that, at the HRC, supported the landmark resolution passed just last month, recognizing the universal right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. Turning to issues of human rights and oceans, I just want to raise two actions that we're taking on this front. First, the ocean is as much a part of our home as our land. We are a large ocean state, as are all nations in the Pacific. And so we know that we cannot afford uncertainty or ambiguity around our maritime boundaries. In 2016, we formally deposited our maritime borders as part of our commitment under UNCLOS, confirming that our borders will not change as sea level increases. And more recently, we worked with our Pacific partners on the Declaration on Preserving Maritime Borders in the face of sea level rise. As a country, but also as a region, we are committed to ensuring that sovereign control over resources and boundaries is maintained, and we will continue to feel our responsibility to conserve, manage, and sustainably use the resources within our EEZs. I think you heard the Prime Minister speak to what Fiji is doing in terms of committing to 30% of MPAs. The Micronesia, as part of the Micronesia Challenge, has really led for many years in this space, and we've already met that goal as a region, and we're looking now to go further. In addition, we know that maritime shipping is critical to our economy and our health and our livelihoods. And that's why we've been spearheading a proposal in the International Maritime Organization for the maritime shipping industry to get to zero emissions by 2050. And to turn that into reality, we have been pushing for a $100 levy per ton. The revenue generated would play a crucial role in helping the sector transform, incentivizing companies to move to greener technology, while also providing crucial support with a portion of the revenue going to vulnerable countries to mitigate and adapt to climate change. That kind of reliable revenue is needed to provide the much needed resources for a just transition in countries that need them most. We really need reliable, predictable, accessible financing that we can count on to adapt to the realities that we're facing. As part of that financing discussion, I think I'll just mention that we're developing our resilience nationally through a national adaptation plan, but we know that we're going to need the financial support to implement those plans. Our hope is that the special rapporteur that I mentioned at the HRC will play a crucial role in reminding all states of their responsibility vis-a-vis human rights and the obligation to financially support adaptation. Our belief is that finance is critical to rights and to success here in Glasgow, by the way. And along those lines, we have advocated for a balance between mitigation and adaptation finance, and that's something that we're taking into the negotiation rooms and pushing very hard. And as part of that, we have included in a recent statement by the High Ambition Coalition that the RMI convenes, included language on at least doubling of climate finance for adaptation. Finally, just to get in a bit into the technicalities, this year we're looking and we need to finalize the Paris Rulebook. It's essential that we work together as islands and as countries in ensuring that it is completed in a way that keeps ambition and a commitment to human rights front and center. And in particular, as we continue our discussions on Article 6, we really have to ensure that that human rights aspect is central to the discussion and protected. I think just to close, as I mentioned, we do convene the High Ambition Coalition. We're very, very proud to have launched at leader level a statement earlier this week, which sets out what we think can be the benchmarks for success at this COP. And we were so glad to work in particular with our Pacific partners in launching that statement. We're very happy that Fiji joined with us and many others. It's a broad coalition of both developing and developing partners who've come around and really set out what it means to be ambitious on mitigation, adaptation, and finance for this COP. And we'll continue to work hard in those negotiation rooms to see some of those in the outcomes of the COP. Thanks so much.
Fantastic. Tina, thank you so much for reminding us of the extraordinarily important dimension of human rights to all of this. Thank you for the small but mighty action that you are taking and for the work together in partnership across large island developing states. So we look forward to continuing that conversation and working with you in partnership. It is now my pleasure to introduce Noelle OBrien, incoming Director of Climate Change for the Asian Development Bank. The Asian Development Bank, you may have heard, recently increased its commitment to $100 billion in climate financing to its members through 2030. ADB also has a commitment to leverage $5 billion for ocean investments. So we would love to hear more about these commitments. We'd love to hear more about the role of the ocean across them. And therefore, we're delighted to offer you the floor to share some of your thoughts, as well as the role of coastal communities in adapting and investing in these tools. So the floor is yours, Noelle. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Let me begin by acknowledging Prime Minister Bainimarama. Great that you're here and you've been able to travel, particularly with the struggles that Fiji's experienced with COVID. And congratulations on the act. Certainly from the ADB side, we look forward to working with you in the implementation of that. And Minister Eustis, lovely to meet you today and to be on the panel. And Mark, but I do want to just acknowledge the work that Tina's been doing. Marshall Islands borders have been closed since March 2020, and Tina is one of the few representatives that sits outside the country. So I think for her, and particularly I think Pepe is here from Tuvalu. Kiribati is not represented today. Those are our 3 Pacific atolls. So really great to be in a position to join you on the panel, and I hope I can be even a slightly as encouraging. So at the Asian Development Bank, we have a very significant Pacific program. We have offices in most all of the Pacific countries with which we now work. And I think that presence and the strengthening of that presence is a significant contributor in our work. The fund, we've increased our ambition to $100 billion. That was announced just recently. One of the most interesting things in that is that we've committed a third of that to adaptation. That's a very significant step up, and obviously a big challenge to identify the mechanisms to implement that. Please remember that ADB, we are a bank, but a lot of our funding to the Pacific is in grant form. And a number of our countries are only grant recipients, so that's very, very significant. We have also committed to Paris alignment. All sovereign investments will be Paris aligned by 2023, and our private sector investments by 2025. Ocean-based mitigation and adaptation solutions will be a key part in that work. Everything from offshore renewable energy to restoring mangroves, forests, coral reefs will be a critical to support vital ecosystem services and the resilience of the vulnerable coastal communities, the cities some of which you've seen today. As part of our Healthy Oceans Action Plan, which we launched in 2019 in Fiji, we agreed a new technical assistance program this year. This is building coastal resilience through nature-based and integrated solution. and it supports Pacific nations to prepare coastal adaptation pathways and take actions to increase ecosystem and community resilience. One of our examples of that work is within the Republic of the Marshall Islands. We're supporting atoll conservation and resource management planning following traditional processes. And in Fiji, we have eco-sensitive coastal protection infrastructure, which is an initial pilot for ADB. We've also, our work is to support nature-positive investments, including through mainstreaming nature and ocean benefits into our traditional sectors of maritime transport, urban infrastructure, and agriculture. And part of what we've done in our Pacific approach, which is 2021 to 25, a strategy launched in June 2021, just earlier this year, we've made a much more significant commitment to holistic climate change collaboration with the countries. As part of that, we've just completed a comprehensive analysis for the main island of Tongatapu. It combines classic disaster analysis with climate analysis and gives a full indication of the degree of risk, not just building assets, but water, energy, and transport assets. That's work that we will be releasing next week with the government of Tonga. And finally, we're pleased that we are able to support the Coalition of Atoll Nations on climate change. And that is a grouping of the 4 atolls, Marshall Islands, Kiribati, Tuvalu, and the Maldives. We are supporting them both in the governance structure of that work, but also through nature-based solutions for climate adaptation. And we're grateful to support from the Ireland Trust Fund for that work. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Noelle, for these tremendous commitments and the support of the Asian Development Bank and the long-term partnership that you are showing in the region. We're very much looking forward to learning more about how we can support these efforts again. So thank you very much. And before we continue, we would like to show another very short video which highlights the important role that Pacific communities can play in accelerating climate action.
Our communities here in the islands of Yasawa are already experiencing the impacts of climate change and are usually one of the first to be hit by tropical cyclones, rising seas, and droughts. We are taking action to establish community marine protected areas and sustainably use our natural resources on land and in the sea. We are integrating our traditional knowledge, nature-based solutions, and innovation to strengthen our food security and food preservation programs as part of our community disaster risk reduction plans. I am working with my community to be better prepared and to adapt to the changes that climate change has brought. But we can't do this alone. With our traditional knowledge, science, and nature-based solutions, we can accelerate climate action. We are calling all our leaders at COP26 to make necessary commitment to save nature, achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement. Help us help you implement the Paris Agreement.
Name Blami Keti Dogimau, Liblomoro Village, Bogia District, Medeng Province. May planning divide la Nambis, la downim heavy bilang coastal erosion, na sea level rise. Please help us, help you to implement the Paris Agreement.
Hello everyone, my name is Alpha Gili. I'm from Saragi, a small coastal community in Western Province in the Solomon Island. My key role is to work with the communities under the West Coast Resource Management to sustainably manage our fishery resources, in particular the harvest of sea grapes, which is one of our main source of income. Women participated actively in this sea grapes management as they have already seen and felt the tangible benefits from income gained from sales of cigarettes. Our coastlines are eroding. Heavy rainfall has caused sediment runoffs, which impact our cigarettes management sites, which is our main source of income and food. But we are not giving up. We are integrating our traditional knowledge with community-based fishery management and climate change adaptation pathway planning to strengthen us in the face of climate change. Our cigarettes management to become resilient and to be able to adapt to the situation we are experiencing now. But we cannot do this by ourselves. We are calling leaders at COP26 to make commitments and recognize our struggle to take action and help us to fight against climate change. Please help us help you to implement Paris Agreement. With that, thank you, and thank you so much, one and all.
So I'd like to thank our WWF Pacific colleagues for that video and that call to action, which we now must all heed. It is with this background that I'm delighted to introduce one of our own, Dr. Mark Drew, the director of WWF's Pacific program. Mark, we've heard this call to action. You've heard from the panelists, us giving a variety of perspectives. Now we're interested to hear from you what you think the role of the conservation community is in supporting these efforts. How do you think WWF and partners can contribute to the success of these initiatives and ensure the meaningful engagement of local communities? The floor is yours, Mark.
Thank you, Pop. Can you hear me okay? Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to begin by thanking Prime Minister, and others on this panel. It's enlightening to hear what I think is both encouraging news and, for me, in an exciting time. I'd like to also say that I'm super excited about what lies ahead. The challenges are vast. They're very, very serious. They're very, very real. But I carry with that challenge a lot of excitement and a lot of motivation to do what we can to affect change. And a contextual comment, if I may, Polly, before responding specifically to the role of CSOs, is the more I've been in this business and thinking about things, the more I realize that we are talking about incredibly complex issues. We're talking about, in this space, communities on the front lines. Those communities are individuals, they're humans, there's families, there's villages. And to solve those problems at the community scale are incredibly difficult. But that conversation is also nested in a far greater, far more complex conversation that is taking place at the likes of here in COP, and how nations and regions and the global community are going to come together to try to solve some very, very complex issues. And so for me, this conversation is representative of one in what I'm calling the conservation or development supply chain that needs to be happening. But that chain needs to be built, and that chain needs to be comprised of fundamental and strong links to build a chain that can create momentum and drive change. And that chain itself needs to include, I think, first and foremost, political leadership, which is here today, as we've heard. We need to have the financial backing and the financial institutions supporting the work that needs to be done in these countries behind the political leadership. We see that, we're hearing that today. We need to have the the communities themselves be involved in those conversations in a fundamental link, because at the end of the day, what we are doing in terms of making decisions, the conditions that they are living in are representative of response variables. They need to be involved fundamentally. We need to have the private sector involved. We're going to hear from Anton and Matanataki. We need that business, that finance acumen. We need that investment to help move the needle, and we need to be thinking in a whole lot of different ways around how do we change how we're approaching conservation, biodiversity, security, really. And we need the local youths, and we need those fresh minds, that energy to keep us in line, to keep us pushing forward, and to engage their mindset and their motivations, and at the end of the day, to help them realize a brighter future. And then we need the CSOs themselves. So with that context, a couple of points I think relevant from my perspective on the role of NGOs and coming from WWF. I think there's probably 4 or 5 key roles. First, we're there to support the governments and the people and the environments within the countries we're working. We come with an agenda. We want to see a more biodiverse, conservation-oriented, community-healthy ecosystems, but that's part and parcel because we feel like they are so intimately linked to the communities and the well-being of people. We want to be there, we want to align our agendas, and we want to support the aspirations and the governments that are moving forward and their ultimate decision makers within those countries we're working. Secondly, I think institutions such as WWF have an opportunity to bring resources to bear. I'm talking funding resources. In real dumbing down terms, we have access to funding that some other organizations or some of the other chain links don't have. For example, we have accreditation that allows us to access funding through the JEF or the GCF mechanisms. We have that opportunity. We can bring resources to bear, and we should, and I think we are doing so. I think we are also able to bring innovation to the table through the networks and through the contacts that we have, through the ability to reach out to academia, to the private sector, to bring innovative ideas. And I think we'll probably hear from Anton and Matanataki as an example of where we've been doing that, working with a group of very, very talented financial thinkers that are trying to bring innovative ideas to create investment incentives, to advance investments in programs and projects that are sustainable in nature, that create a return on investment, and that drive and create, again, interest from the private sector to be involved as one of the key links in that chain. We also are quite talented, I think, or a key role, I should say, as a convener. We have a large body of network. We are working with a number of different people, and we are very interested in being one that facilitates dialogue and bringing the different actors to the table to have these serious and very complex conversations that are going to allow us to move forward. And then lastly, the CSO and the WWFs of the world, we need to execute on the programs and the funding that we're able to get to deliver, again, to be supporting the people and the governments in which we're working. I think if we can do our role, play our role, and if all the different other links in that chain are willing to come with us, that chain will be strong, and by default, the communities themselves will be in a position to work collectively with us to address climate and biodiversity challenges before us. And I think we can do that. So with that, I'd like to say thank you. One last comment is WWF Pacific has 51 wonderful people working out in Fiji, Papua New Guinea, and the Solomon Islands. And I just want to give a big shout out to a wonderful group of people that are doing their part from that CSO link, if you will. Thanks, Polly.
Thank you very much, Mark, for outlining the very important role that all of those colleagues in the Pacific and, of course, across the global network have. So we're very keen to continue that discussion. You mentioned the youth voice, and we're delighted to have now with us Ms. Atina Schultz, who is a Pacific youth advocate working as a part of the Pacific Island Climate Action Network. She will very briefly share her thoughts on what the youth are looking for in terms of outcomes from COP26.
Good morning to you all from the very sunny Pacific Islands. My name is Atina, and I'm a third-year law student at the University of the South Pacific, and I'm also from the Marshall Islands. While I cannot be in Glasgow to deliver my intervention physically for various reasons, I am thankful for the technology that has made it possible to share my message with you all. And I would also like to thank the organizers of this event for including me on this panel. I'm here to talk to you about the role of Pacific youth in accelerating climate action. Pacific youth face a particular challenge in that our perspectives and ideas are often overlooked in favor of the more senior members of our society. We are often supposed to make way and keep silent in their presence, as is our custom and culture. However, despite this, Pacific youth have made great strides in the climate justice movement and have really demonstrated our ability to be climate leaders. For instance, at the Pacific Islands Climate Action Network, our secretariat is wholly staffed by young people in their early to mid-20s and students like myself. In August, our small team of youths banded with many big organizations around the Pacific, including Greenpeace Australia and the Pacific, Oxfam and the Pacific Island Students Fighting Climate Change, and other regional organizations to carry out a climate justice summit, which culminated in the creation of the Pacific Demands. The Pacific demands are a list of ambitious demands from Pacific civil society, and they include demands on empowering coastal communities in adaptation strategies. In another project, my colleague Belinda Rickamani from the Solomon Islands and I co-led a pilot project focusing on building the capacity of Pacific youths in the UNFCCC process and the thematic areas, including adaptation. The idea behind our project was to build the capacity and increase the awareness of the youths through various technical trainings and pairing them with experienced climate actors so that they could contribute in substance to the climate discourse and solutions domestically and internationally. Another very monumental youth movement that originated here in the Pacific is the campaign to seek an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice. And this advisory opinion will touch on climate change and human rights. And this initiative is led and championed by a student activist group that I'm a part of called the Pacific Island Students Fighting Climate Change. The campaign has since been picked up by the Vanuatu government, and one of the potential benefits of pursuing this is to provide authoritative baselines on state action on adaptation, as well as international cooperation and assistance. So far, the youth have organized 2 side events in the COP venue and another one that will be happening next week. So if you see them around, please do give your support to them. Currently, the Asia Development Bank, through Youth for Asia, is creating another project called the Catalyzing Youth-Led Climate Action in Atoll Nations. And this project will support Pacific youth in climate action through capacity building in climate risk assessment and climate innovations, as well as small grant funding to implement and upscale youth-led climate solutions. So all these different activities I've just talked about, they're just a few examples of how youth have contributed to climate action and how they've accelerated it. Youth have a lot of energy and are brimming with ideas and have the strongest stake in the future of the world. There are so many benefits to involving youth. Meaningful youth engagement will contribute to enhance the capacity of young people to become better citizens and productive members of society, as our skills, character, and confidence are being developed in these activities. Most importantly, youth involvement also means an increase in development outcomes. We are creative, resilient, resourceful, and innovative, so we can greatly contribute to the implementation of the Paris Agreement through various angles. However, I recognize that there are still things that we need to really maximize our potential to bring about positive change. 1, we need mentors and experienced actors willing to spend time with us to show us the ropes. 2, we need more access to educational opportunities to better our knowledge and refine our skills, such as scholarships, training opportunities, etc. In the absence of any, I believe governments, academic, and financial institutions should work together to create these opportunities. We need these spaces to learn from experienced educators and fellow passionate youths to really maximize our potential and build our capacity for the workforce and for the fight to save the world from environmental ruin. To close, I really want to say that youth should not be overlooked and should be seen as key actors in the fight for climate justice. Youth comprise the majority of the Pacific population and have the great potential for added value to collective efforts to implement the Paris Agreement. Considering that youth have the strongest stake in the future of the world at this time, it is important for leaders to really invest in us as the future torchbearers. Pomotada, and thank you for your time.
Inspiring words from Atina, and we do indeed need to invest in their capacity, but certainly I think they have a tremendous amount to teach all of us, and certainly I know I could use some of that energy right now. So thank you very much, Anna. We very much look forward to continuing the conversation with Atina and her colleagues in the region. It is now my great pleasure. We are running a little bit late, so I would like to introduce Anton Gigov from Matanataki to talk about the important role of the private sector to join us in partnership. Anton, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to ask you to move very quickly through the presentation as we are running behind. Very welcome to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And it's such an honor to be part of this esteemed panel and such great insights. And I'll be really short, and I'll just tell you a brief story about community businesses, resilience, and Darth Vader from Star Wars. So I wish I could start by saying, long time ago in a galaxy far away, but unfortunately I can't, because the story that I'm talking about is right here and right now, and we saw what that means in real life for coastal communities. These are livelihoods, there is food security, and there is threats that they're facing. And on the positive side, though, the response to that challenge in Fiji has been a program by WWF called the Great Sea Reef Resilience Program. And what it essentially does is that the adaptation to climate change, part of the solution is building resilient ecosystems. And Matana Taki, the firm that I represent, is a very honored to be part of this program and to bring the private sector capacity, the private sector business knowledge and investments into the Great Sea Reef program. And what Matana Taki essentially does is to deploy the private sector toolbox of business and finance to addressing the challenges of climate adaptation, but also biodiversity loss and the social challenges that are intimately connected to that. What we did and how we did it is essentially we started just talking to entrepreneurs and to communities, and we screened more than 150 business opportunities and realized that in Fiji, you can essentially look at two fairly distinct group of businesses. One are the commercial ones, and the others are the community businesses. And on the commercial side, these are larger projects. For example, we're developing a waste management solution for Viti Levu, for the largest island. We call Vula Vula Sara, and that's a holistic solution to have, again, pristine shores and clean ecosystems free of waste in Fiji. But that's on the commercial side. What I want to focus really briefly more is the community businesses that we've identified and the lessons learned from that. On the community business side, when you develop a business, your ultimate goal is to have a sustainable and a profitable business that can attract commercial financing. And let's be honest, for a coastal community, that's hard. And working with coastal communities is hard. Why will they face structural challenges that are preventing them, or that's make it very hard for them to compete in the international market economy? They're more remote. They have less access to education and according capacity. On the positive side, they have a lot of or a wealth of natural resources. They have a lot of traditional knowledge, and there is a intimate connection between ecosystem and culture. And so building resilient ecosystems and businesses around that is really something that can work in communities. However, pointed individual approaches won't solve that. We need smart approaches, we need innovative approaches. And on the business side, we need combination of capacity, of innovative business models, of interesting products and services. But on the finance side, we need innovative finance solutions like blended finance. And let me tell this out loud: blended finance can't be just cheap finance. And cheap loan won't solve coastal communities' problems. Blended finance needs to be smart finance. And the Global Fund for Coral Reefs, I think, is a prime example of how blended finance can really work. And this smart finance needs to address coastal communities face, and these are a holistic or a whole set of individual actions that we need to take. And now I'm coming to Darth Vader. So if you think of the character arc of Darth Vader, it's a boy that's full of hope, full of optimism and ideals that at some point departs from them and turns evil. But at the end of the story, he comes back to his core values and restores what he has destroyed. And let's be honest, the private sector has been and partially still is part of the problem. So addressing the problem with the tools that have partially caused it is a major challenge, but we're up to it and we want to live up to it. And so what the Great Serif Resilience Program and WWF have created for the private sector, which is of great value, they have just very clearly set out the goal. These are the threats, and if you can solve them, you can save the reef and you can create resilient communities. And the solutions that we offer try to really address these threats.
Anton,
I'm just
thank
going
you.
to finish with one last word on. Most of our team are Fijians, but I'm not, and few other people are also not. And when we come and work with communities and with local entrepreneurs, we come with a lot of humility, and we never come with a pre-baked solution. And we always try to learn as much as we can from them and provide our value to the extent we can provide it. So that's my call to everyone in the room to take a similar approach. And again, thank you very much for having us.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful. We very much look forward to following up. I'd like to thank all of our panelists for their insightful contributions. I would especially like to thank the government Fiji for partnering with us on this event, and for the Prime Minister in particular for your leadership and action on oceans for a very long time, but also at this COP as well. So thank you. I would also like to thank the ADB for the partnership in this event and your continued commitment to healthy oceans, and for your continued work towards the shared goals in the region. I'd like to thank all of you who joined us today for the important conversation. We look forward to building on this conversation and continuing it. And with the very last word, we have the ambassador from Australia who wanted to just say a very short word from his perspective. We have 1 minute, Mr. Ambassador. I'm so sorry.
Look, thank you. I know it's over time, but I just wanted to say a very big thank you for WWF and Fiji for hosting this. I think the leadership that has been discussed about Pacific Islands around both climate and oceans has been absolutely critical. I think the hosting of COP23 and bringing the Oceans Blue COP agenda in was really key. Prime Minister Bainimarama and Prime Minister Morrison are both on the Sustainable Oceans panel, and the need to look at how we drive greater ambition on the oceans is key. For Australia, we've also agreed to 30% of our maritime zones being protected, and with that is a greater focus now about how we're going to deliver nature-based solutions, including in the Pacific and Australia, bring in Indigenous knowledge and experience to be able to invest in those partnerships with WWF and local communities to ensure that we can better deliver both the protection of our oceans and biodiversity and climate action. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. And thank you also, Mr. Secretary, for your support. And thank you all. And we very much look forward to seeing you with strong ocean outcomes at this COP and strong partnership going forward for communities and our shared ambition for the future. Thank you very much.